English did not truly begin in England as a finished language. Instead, it was born from the journeys and movements of different tribes long before the country became what we know today. The Angles, Saxons, and Jutes came from the lands we now call Germany, Denmark, and Northern Europe. They carried their own dialects across the sea, and when they settled, their words began to shape the speech of the island. Imagine a land where people suddenly heard new sounds, new ways of naming the world around them, and over time those sounds became a shared tongue. That is why the earliest English was not one single pure language, but a mixture from the very beginning. The name England itself comes from the Angles, showing how deeply their influence took root. What they brought was not just words, but a way of life, reflected in their speech, words for family, farming, seasons, and kinship. These first layers of English were earthy and direct, tied to the land and the everyday lives of the people who used them. Yet, because the island had seen waves of settlers and conquerors before, the soil was already prepared for mixing. In truth, the history of English begins as a story of constant arrival, where no single group could claim the language as theirs alone, because each left their mark on what it would become. Old English, the earliest form of the language, would sound almost unrecognizable to us today. If someone from that time were to speak, we might not even realize it was English at all. Their words were shaped by sounds and letters that have since disappeared, such as the thorn and d-eth, which made the thief sounds in words like thet, that, and odor, other. Poetry from that age, like Beowulf, was filled with strong rhythms and repeated sounds, carrying the voice of warriors, kings, and storytellers. This Old English was practical and rooted in daily life. It had words for the natural world, for family, and for simple actions. Hus for house, whiff for woman, stan for stone. Yet even within its limits, it was rich and flexible, able to tell grand stories of heroes and battles. Over the centuries, it shifted slowly, as all living languages do, bending to the needs of the people who spoke it. Though distant from our modern speech, Old English is the foundation on which everything else was built, the first deep layer of a language that would one day travel the world. When the Vikings arrived from the north, carrying their ships across stormy seas, they brought more than warriors and weapons. They brought their language too. Norse words began to mingle with Old English, and instead of pushing one another out, the two tongues blended. The Vikings used short, sharp, practical words, and many of these slipped into everyday English. Words like sky, egg, knife, and window came directly from them, giving people new ways to describe the world around them. This mixing was not just about words, but also about grammar. The influence of Norse helped simplify some of English's older, heavier endings. Instead of long, complicated word forms, English began moving toward the clearer patterns we use today. The two groups, local English speakers and Norse newcomers, had to find ways to understand one another, and in doing so, they shaped a language that became more direct, flexible, and open. The Viking impact shows how English grew not by shutting others out, but by welcoming new voices. Their presence left lasting traces, so that even now, in the words we use every day, the sound of the North still echoes. In 1066, everything changed with the Norman conquest. When William, Duke of Normandy, crossed the English Channel and claimed the throne, he brought with him not just soldiers, but a new language, French. For centuries after, French became the language of kings, nobles, and the law, while the common people still spoke English. This created a divide, but over time, the two languages began to mix, leaving behind something new and far richer than before. From French came words of power, elegance, and sophistication. English gained terms like court, judge, beauty, honor, and castle, giving it a vocabulary for law, culture, and refinement. The everyday English of the people blended with the polished French of the ruling class, layering the language with choices. A person might ask, an Old English word, or inquire, a French one, begin or commence, freedom or liberty. These pairs still show how English carries the mark of two worlds within it. The Norman conquest reshaped not only politics, but the very sound of the language. English absorbed thousands of new words, shifting its identity from something plain and local into something broader, more expressive, and ready for the changes yet to come. It was no longer only the voice of one people, but a bridge between cultures. As English continued to grow, it opened its doors to Latin and Greek, languages that carried the weight of learning, faith, and science. Through the Church, Latin shaped the words of religion: angel, spirit, glory, salvation. These terms gave voice to the deepest hopes and fears of people, words that could touch both heart and soul. Scholars, too, leaned on Latin and Greek to name the world of knowledge. Medicine, astronomy, philosophy, and later the sciences all borrowed heavily from them. Words like education, medicine, philosophy, biology, and democracy expanded English far beyond daily life, lifting it into classrooms, libraries, and debates. These borrowed words often sounded grand and formal compared to the simpler Anglo-Saxon and Norse terms already in use. This created a balance in English: short, earthy words for the home and fields, alongside long, elegant ones for thought and learning. A person could speak plainly of life and death, or with solemnity of mortality and eternity. The presence of Latin and Greek gave English the ability to move between the humble and the lofty, to capture both the soil beneath one's feet and the stars above one's head. By drawing on these ancient tongues, English gained a depth that made it not just a language of survival, but one of ideas, art, and vision. It became a vessel able to hold the wisdom of centuries, ready to carry it forward into the future. The arrival of the printing press in the late 15th century marked a turning point for English. When William Caxton set up his press in 1476, books that once had to be copied slowly by hand could suddenly be produced in greater numbers. This meant more people could read, more ideas could spread, and for the first time, English began to take on a more stable form. Before this, words were often spelled in many different ways, depending on who was writing them. The press forced printers to choose one spelling, and those choices began to shape the way English would look on the page for centuries to come. But the printing press did more than standardize spelling. It gave English a stronger sense of identity. Religious texts, stories, and poetry became more widely available, and people across different regions began to see the same words in the same form. Though the language was still full of quirks and inconsistencies, it started to feel more unified. At the same time, printing brought learning and literature closer to ordinary people. It was no longer just the language of scholars and nobles, but also of merchants, craftsmen, and farmers who could now access books. In this way, the press not only fixed English in ink, but also set it free, allowing it to grow as the language of an entire people rather than a select few. It was the spark that prepared English for the age of writers, thinkers, and dreamers who would soon follow. In the age of Shakespeare, English revealed just how powerful and creative it could be. The language, already shaped by centuries of mixing and borrowing, now stood ready to stretch in bold new directions. Shakespeare and his fellow writers filled the stage with words that were alive with passion, wit, and depth. He played with language as if it were clay, shaping it into new forms, inventing phrases, and even creating entirely new words when none existed to capture what he wanted to say. Many of these expressions, like heart of gold, break the ice, and wild goose chase, still live in everyday speech, proof of how deeply his imagination rooted itself in the language. But it was not only about inventing. Shakespeare showed that English could capture every shade of human experience, from the grandeur of kings to the struggles of ordinary men and women. In his hands, English was both poetic and practical, lofty and simple. It could make audiences laugh one moment and weep the next. His words, written at a time when the printing press had made books widely available, spread quickly and became part of the shared voice of the people. This era expanded English beyond being just a tool of survival or trade. It became a language of art, music, and beauty. Shakespeare proved that English could hold the weight of human emotion, carry stories across generations, and open doors into the very soul of mankind. It was during this time that English truly found its spirit as a language of creativity without limits. As England grew into an empire, English traveled far beyond its island home. Ships sailed to distant lands, carrying merchants, soldiers, missionaries, and explorers, and with them went the language. In India, Africa, the Americas, and later Australia, English encountered countless other tongues. Instead of remaining unchanged, it absorbed what it touched, borrowing freely and adding new flavors to its vocabulary. Words like shampoo from Hindi, tomato from Nahuatl, and safari from Swahili found a permanent place in English, each carrying with it a story of cultural meeting and exchange. The spread of English through empire was not gentle. It came with power, trade, and sometimes force, and in many places it pushed against or overshadowed local languages. Yet over time, English also became a bridge, a way for different peoples to communicate across distance and difference. It transformed into more than the language of England. It became a global tongue. By the 18th and 19th centuries, English was being spoken in courts, classrooms, marketplaces, and ports across the world. Its reach was no longer tied only to Britain. It had taken root in many lands, shaped by local voices and experiences. This global spread gave English a diversity no single nation could ever contain. It was becoming the language not of one empire, but of many peoples, preparing it for its role as a world language in the centuries to follow. Today, English continues to grow, just as it always has, by listening, borrowing, and changing with the times. It is no longer bound to one land or one people, but belongs to the world. Everywhere it meets new cultures, new ideas, and new inventions, and with each encounter it takes in fresh words. From technology come terms like internet, email, and hashtag. From music and popular culture, words like karaoke from Japanese or bungalow from Hindi slip into daily speech. English thrives because it never closes its doors. It welcomes what is new and makes it its own. This constant evolution means English is never finished. The way it is spoken in London differs from how it sounds in New York, Sydney, Lagos, or Mumbai, yet all are part of the same story. Each region adds its rhythm, its expressions, its character, and together they make English a truly global language. It carries ancient roots, but is alive in every conversation, adapting to the voices of those who use it. The history of English is a reminder that language is never still. It moves with people, grows with ideas, and changes with every generation. From tribal beginnings to a worldwide presence, English has always been shaped by those who speak it, and so its story is still being written today.